continuing impacts of religion on society in general. And I just want to start this out with saying that the reason why this panel is a panel is because consistently online I see how people say that religion is almost dead in America. Religion doesn't affect anybody's life, or how certain things don't affect people, so therefore they don't matter. And what I wanted to do, and I know a lot of creators here wanted to do, was emphasize the very real impacts that religion still has on our society. And so, the first thing that we want to talk about is how religion has impacted each one of us throughout our life in both our formative years and now. And I'm on the panel too, you can't tell. I'm in the moderator position, but I am on the panel. So for me, it was an innate thing to believe in God. I never thought to question it or whatever. And then I did, and I started seeing how it affects our society on the whole. Currently, right now, I am the Central Region Director of the Original Motto Project. What we do is we pay attention and we look for violations of the separation of church and state as it applies to In God We Trust. A lot of people feel like that's not breaking the separation of church and state, or that it's not an important subject, but I would disagree, because when you start seeing In God We Trust being plastered on police cars, in government buildings, and just everywhere in your life, it starts to become hard to discern our government from a theocracy. Because the whole concept of In God We Trust is very much a religious idea. In God We Trust talks about how you should put all of your knowledge and trust in God. God should be the one thing that you know. So it's really antithetical to the whole idea of school in order to push In God We Trust into schools. That's not going to stop anybody from shooting up the schools. It's not going to stop people from harming students while in the school. It's not going to do anything else but provide an invisible shield that they think is going to protect them, when it really doesn't. All it does is it actually breaks, the separation of church and state, because public schools or public buildings or police cars should not be pushing any kind of religious dogma on anybody.
And one of the things that I wanted to mention, because you brought it up, people do say that to us all the time, activists. They say, oh, it's not a big deal somebody has, In God We Trust on a police officer car. It's, why do atheists go picking battles? Why are atheists such bullies? When do you want people to take care of it? When it's such a big deal that it's super hard to actually fix? So taking care of these little things as we go along and keeping people respecting the separation of church and state, that's exactly what we need to be doing now, no matter how small anyone says it is. But the question was, how does religion...
what impacts do you see on your life, both then and now?
So a lot of positivity has come from religion because of its negativity. So I grew up in a household where my parents hated homosexuality. My parents thought anyone who was gay or transgender was a freak, or they were nasty, they were disgusting, and that was driven into me and my siblings our entire lives, right? So my mom would give nasty looks to a girl in the grocery store wearing a hijab. I didn't want to be that woman giving somebody nasty looks. I didn't want to be that mother telling my child, you can't be friends with that person because we hate them. So because of the culture of religion, it actually helped shape me into, well, let's see what we can do to love these people. If these people are so hated, then I think I should love them. And it also made me turn from what my parents taught me who God was and what religion was, to start forming my own ideas, right? My God could not ever hate somebody. So my parents were wrong. And as I started losing my faith, it was a very hard, tragic step for me to lose my faith. I actually prayed to a God I no longer believed in to give me my faith back at one point. But I realized that it was that turning God into who I needed him to be is something that a lot of religious people suffer with. Their God doesn't hate homosexuals, whereas somebody else says, my God is going to throw you in jail for being a homosexual. And then we start to see how we all created God from our own outlooks and who we are, and that's how religion is.
Sorry to interrupt Zod before he starts, but this is Allie Jackson. I forgot to introduce her. This is Allie Jackson. She's CEO of Atheist Republic, the company in general.
Largest atheist group in the world.
Yes.
The effects on me were a bit more overtly negative in a lot of ways, and that I completely bought into it for most of my childhood anyway. One of the most dramatic ways is that I was very vividly driven by the fear of hell, which if you haven't experienced that in whatever doctrine you grew up in, that can be extremely intense, to the point that I didn't really... I think one of the cruelest things about evangelical Christianity, at least the brand I grew up in, is they say that salvation is very easy because you just ask Christ into your heart. But what exactly that is and when you've done it is very hard for a child to comprehend, and I think that's a very cruel thing to teach them. And I lived with that for a long time, to the point where I wanted to be saved, but I didn't know how to do it. And I was ashamed to ask because I couldn't tell my parents or anybody in my church that I hadn't been saved already. So it was at the point where I comforted myself with the knowledge that I would be able to live out my life on earth, and strangely, due to a chip track, I understood that I would be able to watch my entire life play out again on a big screen while God was there watching, and I would at least be able to enjoy that span of time before I burned for eternity. And that's an extremely hard thing for a child to process. And most of my siblings, a lot of children in my school, dealt with similar things to that. Another big thing it did was completely messed up my understanding of why things are actually right and wrong. And that's something that I think a lot of you might experience that too. You have to completely relearn that when you become an atheist, to at least some extent. It wasn't that difficult for me. I just kind of conceptualized as a Christian. But when you remove God from it and actually understand why you do and don't do things and why things are and aren't wrong, throw out the garbage like condemning homosexuals and things like that for perfectly innocent things, you have to totally reinvent your understanding of morality. And then the last big thing I would say is that I bought into what you rejected, which was looking down on outsiders. Every single day except Saturday, I was in the same building for church or school, and we were taught to fear the outside world and to look down on them. And children tend to buy into that if it's drilled into their heads. And so that kind of messed up my mindset. One of the positives it did for me as I turned away from religion is it actually got me interested in science and a lot of other things in ways that I probably would not have been as I processed a lot of things I'd learned in childhood. So,
yeah, instead of hunching my shoulders down, I'm going to see if I can do this. So, as you guys know by now, I'm sure, because I don't stop talking about it, Jehovah's Witnesses permeated every part of my life. I mean, there came a point where I wanted to live as a normal person, even though I was still a brainwashed person. So I got a girlfriend. I started living life the way I wanted to, and it took 3 years for it to finally work its way out of my psyche. 3 years is a very long time. And aside from that, actually, I wanted to touch on something Allie was saying. You said you prayed at one point for your faith back, right? That is actually a really common thing that religious people try to get you to do. They say, if you just say a prayer as honest as you can, and you just ask God for Him to reveal the truth to you, then He will. That is also another brainwashing technique, trying to get confirmation bias to appear. It's trying to get you to start looking for God in different places. So I don't even fall for it. I don't even bother. I will look for the evidence of God. I don't need faith or prayer to show.
So, one of the things, like I mentioned before, was how people like to say that religion is dying off, religion is going away. It doesn't have an effect on our society. When, in fact, in the past few decades, we have seen a monumental surge in it. Now, while we do see the nuns growing, and that's a great thing, we also see religious fanatics growing. We also see that far side of the discussion getting even farther on that side and being even more outspoken. Just like what I was saying with In God We Trust, it first started out being on public buildings, being in courtrooms and whatnot, and then it progressed to police cars. Now, in the wake of the mass shooting incidences that we've had, people want to put it in schools. And this progression is the type of progression that you see when you find that it's creeping in. It's like feature creep. It creeps in, you don't know that it's there until you're pretty much Nazis. And so that's what this next question is about, is how, for you guys, have you seen the religious influence change over the past 10 or 20 years?
So my organization focuses a lot on ex-Muslims in Islamic countries. So that's kind of where I'm going to be speaking from, whereas I know we're all right now in the safety of the United States, and you just might not see how it's changed a lot recently. We can look at Saudi Arabia, we can look at Iran, we can look at how they were before 1979, and we can see gorgeous women with straight long hair and go-go boots and mini skirts, and they're at the universities, and they're all over society. They're being exactly who they want to be. And then we can look now, where women aren't allowed in theaters, okay, where women aren't allowed to drive, even though I understand Saudi Arabia is trying to make those changes. He's throwing a few bones to the women of society. But we look at what religion has done over the past couple of decades in Islamic countries. They went from people having freedoms, people being able to do whatever they want to do, to women being forced to wear a hijab. And if they take their hijab off in public, they're getting their legs broken, they're getting thrown in jail. These women are getting charged an extra 10 years for promoting prostitution, for taking a cloth off of their heads. So yeah, religion has changed drastically. It's changing our society drastically. And I'm sorry.
It's hard for me to speak to this very clearly, just because I saw it from two different perspectives over that period of time, having been inside it and then outside it. But what I think I perceive in general is that there's a growth in the non-population, or the non-believing population, and as that happens, the extremes become more extreme, and the people on the really fundamentalist side are starting to dig in. And I've seen that with people I've known personally. And it's hard for me to interpret if that's because I see them different now, or if they are becoming more intense. But I still deal with people from the Christian school, not the one I worked at, but the one I'd grown up with from my childhood, who deal with very intense levels of abuse. They're adults, so it's psychological abuse, but it is a very difficult thing for them to deal with. And I'm just kind of talking them through how they deal with one moment of contact from a parent, because of the way they're raised, can totally send some of them spiraling. And just to put in perspective some of the stuff we were raised with, one of the people I was talking to, when he was younger, he would be spanked if he couldn't speak in tongues or wouldn't speak in tongues. And that kind of interaction between him and his parents continued until now. So I don't know how much it's growing or how much it's just my perception, but I do see a lot of really extreme stance being taken by Christians. And I think there's a growing persecution complex within the Christian community as they lash back against society. There's a whole genre of movies based around that, which irritate me to no end. But I think that's the best answer I can give, just because of my perspective.
That's very interesting. I assume you're talking about God's Not Dead. Is that,
yes.
Is that the movie?
I think there's
Where it came out, yeah, or it's coming out. So.
Let There Be Light, Kevin Sorbo.
Society is becoming less religious, as I think J.E. pointed out over there. The nun category is moving up more and more, which is good. But that means that religious people are, or religious extremists, are getting more worried. They're getting more concerned. They're fighting harder. They're trying to push policies and politicians that will do what they want. And their voice is getting louder because it's getting smaller, right? So that's actually, I think that's probably alienating the moderate Christians, which is kind of working to our advantage, but we just have to keep fighting and pushing and working, and I believe eventually we will get where we need to be. So.
One of the things that has been noticed has been the softening of language towards religious ideologies and religious intrusions like onto our government. For example, we have that National Prayer Breakfast that the president attends. We have several things in our government that allow them to push things as not being religious. Like there are actually people that say that "In God We Trust" is not a religious statement, and that really blows my mind. I mean, it has God right in the motto. I don't see how that can not be religious. And then when you look at the history of it, we adopted the motto as a way to separate ourselves from the godless cockroach, during that era. And we see this very blatant, religious undertone that was taken so long ago, and because people want to go past it, that means that it's not religious, or God, it has some kind of secular meaning, and that's just not the way that it is. So I'm kind of curious to the panel, what kind of softening of language or redefinition of terms or some kind of, I guess, false history are people, using now?
Yeah, Islamophobia. Right off the bat, I'm gonna go there. If you look at the actual definition of what Islamophobia is, it is one who dislikes Islam or Muslims, not Islam and Muslims. And these two things need to be stayed. They need to be kept completely far away from each other. People are not beliefs. People are not ideologies. You can love people and not their beliefs. And this is something that word tries to stop. That word says if you dislike Islam, if you want to bring criticism to Islam, it's because you're Islamophobic, and that word is used to make you out to be a bigot and shut you up. End of story.
Well, I'm again going to speak more to the Christian side of it. I really like what you said about when they say, "In God you trust" is not religious. And I think that's one of the big things they do is, if you really think about it, almost all of our conversation about religion is very euphemistic as far as the way Christians say it. To the point that as an atheist, to be considered blasphemous or disrespectful, all you have to do is explain Christian doctrine in literal terms without softening it.
Just read the Bible.
Yeah, if you posted a quote from the Bible, if you posted a verse from the Bible speaking to slavery, all you're doing is quoting the Bible, but they think you're being extremely disrespectful.
Yep. Which
usually that's probably what we need to do, but all we're doing is quoting the Bible. It's become I think a trite phrase. God sacrificed himself to appease his own, that whole thing. That sounds terrible. A Christian would think you're just being awful for saying that, but is there anything in that is not Christian doctrine? And so there's a whole softening of language that obscures what Christianity is and what religion is, just to hide the fact that, frankly, a lot of it is stupid. And they kind of know that, and so I think, well, in my opinion, they kind of know it. And so our religion is designed to hide that. And getting back to the God we trust thing, there's this whole vague notion of what God is. Nobody will look at you incredulously and say, well, you don't believe in a giant invisible man who permeates the whole universe and created it all. They will say, oh, you don't believe in a higher power that second one makes you sound worse to a lot of people. It conflates the idea of the Judeo-Christian God with some vague sense that there's something wonderful out there. And to a lot of people, that reflects on your character. And the whole notion of fundamentalist God hides in there in our society's conversation, I think, which is why people will tolerate you saying that in God we trust is not a religious motto. It's just some general thing that we think there's something above us. So I think almost all language surrounding religion is designed not consciously by any specific person, but within society. It's just been used to hide what religion is and to make us sound terrible just for talking about it openly.
Yeah, of course, you gave a Christian perspective. I'm going to give a Jehovah's Witness perspective, as always. You guys can expect that from me, probably. But Jehovah's Witnesses have a persecution complex, as I said. But, you know, Christians in general have that persecution complex. It isn't just Jehovah's Witnesses. They feel like they're being attacked at every corner. So what we have to do is approach it from a non-confrontational, calm way so they don't shut down. We need people to hear us out, right? Yeah, we need to attack their ideas and not the people is another thing. You mentioned that about Islam. We aren't attacking Muslims.
No.
We're attacking Islam. And there is nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with attacking ideas.